Far past the edge of known space, near a border that most star maps simply marked with a red warning line, a small listening station drifted in silence. It belonged to the Korvath Assembly, a union of careful, patient species who had spent thousands of years mapping the galaxy without ever taking a single unnecessary risk. The Korvath were not weak. They had strong ships, smart minds, and old wisdom. But they had one rule above all others: never go where the maps say not to go. The red line on their charts marked a region called the Threshold. It was a wide stretch of empty-looking space, full of drifting dust clouds and dead stars, sitting between three major star systems. On the surface, it looked like nothing special, but every scout ship that had ever entered it in the last 2,000 years had vanished. No wreckage, no signal, no survivors. The Korvath Assembly, along with a dozen other species who knew of the place, had agreed on one thing: stay out. That morning, if a starless void can be said to have mornings, the listening station picked up a single ship crossing near the edge of that red line. The operator on duty, a young Korvath named Dasa Rel, blinked her second set of eyes and leaned closer to her console. The ship was small, only about the size of a supply vessel, moving with calm, steady thrust. Its signal beacon was clear and unafraid, broadcasting its identity for anyone who cared to listen. Unknown vessel, human registry, she said quietly to herself, reading the data as it scrolled past. ISV Meridian, independent survey vessel. She had heard of humans before. Everyone had, by now. Humans were the newest species to join the wider galactic community, and already they had a strange reputation. They were curious, in a way that made older species nervous. They asked questions that other species had learned, over long centuries, not to ask. And they went places that other species had learned, over long painful lessons, not to go. Dasa Rel watched the small dot on her screen turn, very slightly, and point its nose directly at the red line. Directly at the threshold. She sat up straight. This was not a mistake. No drifting ship, no lost sensor error could explain that kind of precise turn. The human ship was choosing to go there, on purpose. She sent the report up the chain, and within the hour, it reached the desk of a mid-level commander named Voska Thren, a Korvath officer known for being ambitious, a little reckless by Korvath standards, and always hungry to make a name for himself. Voska read the report twice. Then he smiled, in the strange, stretched way that Korvath smiled when they were excited. "They're going into the threshold," he said to his aide, on purpose, without hesitation, without even slowing down to check their sensors first. "Should we warn them, sir?" the aide asked. Voska shook his head slowly. "No, we follow them." The aide's antennae twitched with worry. "Sir, the threshold has claimed every ship that entered it. Ours, the Granathi. Even the old Ashkar Empire lost 3 warships there, back when they still had an empire." "Yes," Voska said, still smiling. "And no human ship has ever gone in either, until now. Think about it. Either this ship knows something we don't, in which case we learn a very valuable secret, or this ship is about to disappear like all the others, and we get to watch exactly how, from a safe distance, and finally understand what we're dealing with. Either way, the assembly wins." He did not ask permission from his superiors. He knew they would say no. Instead, he requisitioned a small, fast, and very quiet ship called the Silent Needle, a stealth scout built for watching, not fighting. He picked a crew of 4, himself as commander, a sharp young pilot named Sane, a nervous but brilliant sensor officer named Dasa Rel, the same operator who had first spotted the human ship, and an older engineer named Baroith, who had said no to the mission twice before finally agreeing out of loyalty to Voska. Within 6 hours, the Silent Needle slipped out of dock and set a course to follow the ISV Meridian at a careful distance, running on its stealth systems, engines cold enough not to register on any normal sensor sweep. Voska stood at the front viewport, watching the dust clouds of the threshold grow larger and larger ahead of them, and felt something close to joy. Far ahead of them, aboard the ISV Meridian, the mood was very different. There was no fear, no excitement about danger. There was only quiet, steady work. Captain Elena Reyes sat in the command chair, going over a checklist on her tablet, while her small crew moved through their normal routines around her. The Meridian was not a warship. It carried no weapons beyond a basic point defense system meant for stray asteroids. It was a research and survey vessel, built for long, slow missions into unmapped space, with a crew of 5 humans and 1 ship-wide artificial intelligence named Aria. "Confirm heading," Reyes said, not looking up. "Heading confirmed, Captain," Aria answered, her voice calm and clear through the ship's speakers. "We are on course for the threshold boundary. Estimated time to first marker, 14 hours. Beside the captain sat Dr. Kian Osei, a xenoarchaeologist who had spent the last 11 years of his life studying fragments of a language that no living species could read. He was thin, quiet, and always seemed to be somewhere else in his mind, thinking about old ruins and older secrets. It was his research, more than anything else, that had brought the Meridian here. "You're sure about the key?" Reyes said to him, quietly, so the rest of the crew wouldn't hear the doubt in her voice. "As sure as I can be," Osei said. "We tested the transmission pattern against every fragment we recovered from the Kesh wreck. It matches. It should work." "Should," Reyes repeated. "Elena, nothing about this is guaranteed," Osei said, turning to look at her directly. "But I've spent over a decade reading pieces of a dead language left behind by whoever built the Threshold's defenses. This is the first time in recorded history that anyone has had a real chance to go in and come back out again. I believe in the work. I believe in the key." Reyes nodded slowly. She trusted him. She had to, because the mission depended on it, and because in the 2 years they had served together, Osei had never once been wrong about the old languages he studied. She still remembered the day, 3 years ago, when the request for this mission had first landed on her desk back at Fleet Command. It had come with a thick file of research, most of it written in dense academic language she barely understood, along with a short note from Osei himself, asking for a ship, a crew, and permission to fly further than anyone had ever flown before. Most captains would have laughed at the request. The threshold was not a secret. Every species with star charts knew to avoid it. Sending a survey ship there sounded less like an assignment and more like a death sentence with extra paperwork attached. But Reyes had read the whole file, twice, and something in it had convinced her. It wasn't just the linguistic analysis, though that alone was impressive. It was the pattern Osei had found buried in dozens of old wrecks and abandoned outposts, scattered near the threshold's edge. Fragments of the same strange language showing up again and again, always in places connected, however loosely, to the region humans now called Forbidden. He had spent years piecing together not just words, but intent. And what he found, more than anything, was a kind of logic, a test built by minds that valued understanding over brute force. She had taken the file to her superiors, fought for the funding, fought for the ship, and eventually fought for permission to handpick her own crew. It had taken 2 more years to prepare properly, refining the transmission key, building the custom array Nair had designed, training the crew for a mission unlike any other survey run in human history. Now, after all that preparation, they were finally here, on the very edge of the place that had swallowed empires whole. She glanced sideways at Osei, still hunched over his tablet, quietly muttering fragments of an ancient language to himself, as though rehearsing lines for a performance only he understood the stakes of. Whatever happened next, she thought, at least they had done everything humanly possible to be ready for it. The ship's day continued in its usual rhythm, even as it carried them closer to the edge of the unknown. Nair finished her diagnostic and moved on to double-checking the backup power systems, humming an old tune under her breath, something her grandmother used to sing. Webb ran combat simulations he hoped he would never need, going through emergency protocols out of habit more than expectation, since the Meridian carried little more than basic point defense weapons and would stand no real chance against anything determined to destroy it. If the threshold decided to kill them, Webb knew, there would be very little he could do to stop it. His job, as he saw it, was simply to be ready for the small, ordinary dangers, debris, malfunctions, the everyday hazards of deep space travel, while trusting Osei's research to handle the larger, stranger threat waiting ahead. Behind them, at the engineering station, Priya Nair was running a final check on the ship's systems, humming quietly to herself as she worked. She was young for her position, barely 30, but she had built half the custom equipment on this ship herself, including the transmission array that would broadcast Osei's key deep into the threshold. At the security and tactical station sat Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a former military officer who had left the fleet to join survey work because, as he liked to say, he was tired of fighting things and wanted to understand them instead. "Captain," Arya said suddenly, "I am detecting a faint anomaly behind us. Possible sensor ghost, approximately 200,000 kilometers to our rear." Reyes turned in her chair. "Define anomaly." "A momentary heat signature, very brief, consistent with a ship using active stealth systems, but not perfectly masking its engine bleed. It is not repeated. Confidence is low. Approximately 30% that this is a real contact." Webb leaned forward at his station. "Could be nothing. Radiation ghosts happen out here all the time, especially this close to the dust fields." "Keep watching it," Reyes said, quietly. "No active pings. If someone's out there, I don't want them to know we've noticed." "Understood, Captain," Arya replied. Reyes turned back to her console, but her mind was already working through the possibilities. She had read the mission briefings. She knew about the old rumors. Species who avoided this stretch of space like a plague. Ancient warning buoys, still drifting out here in dead languages. Whispered stories about ships that vanished. She had also read Osei's research, seen the evidence with her own eyes, and made her decision months ago that this mission was worth the risk. But she had not expected company. If someone was following them, they were either very brave, very foolish, or simply did not know what they were flying into. Hours passed. The Meridian continued its steady approach, and behind it, unseen, except for that one brief flicker, the silent needle kept pace, hidden in the dust and the dark. Aboard the Korvath ship, Dasarel sat hunched over her sensor console, sweat beading on her smooth gray skin, a sign of nerves that Korvath rarely showed in front of superior officers. She had caught herself, once, letting the engines run a fraction too hot during a course correction, and she was terrified that the human ship's sensors had caught the mistake. "Report," Voska said, standing behind her. "No change in their heading or speed, sir," she said. "If they detected anything, they're not reacting to it." "Good," Voska said. "Humans are said to be clever, but perhaps their sensors are as unrefined as their manners." Barrowith, the old engineer, made a low sound of disagreement from his station, but said nothing directly. He had served on Korvath ships for over 60 years, longer than Voska had been alive, and something about this entire mission sat wrong with him. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the same feeling he got before a storm on his home world, a pressure in the air that told him to find shelter before the sky turned dark. "Commander," he said finally, "may I speak freely?" Voska waved a hand. "Go ahead, old friend." "We are following a ship into a place that has killed everything that has ever entered it, based only on the fact that it looked confident doing so. Confidence is not the same as safety. Humans are new to this galaxy. It's very possible they simply do not yet understand what the red line on the star charts means." Voska considered this for a moment, his stretched smile fading slightly. "You may be right, Barrowith. Perhaps they are foolish, and perhaps we are about to watch them die. But if that is true, we learn exactly how the threshold kills, from a very safe distance, and we bring that knowledge home. If you are wrong, and they do know something, then we learn something even more valuable. There is no outcome here that does not benefit the assembly. Except the one where we die too," Barrowith muttered, quiet enough that only Sane, the young pilot beside him, seemed to hear it. Sane said nothing, but her hands tightened slightly on the flight controls. Barrowith had not always been a cautious man. In his youth, he had served on some of the Assembly's most aggressive exploration vessels, pushing into unmapped systems with the same hunger for discovery that now burned in Voska. But 60 years changes a person. He had watched too many young, eager commanders vanish chasing glory in places the old charts warned them away from. He had helped write 3 of the reports that eventually became part of the Assembly's official warnings about the threshold, after a mission he had served on early in his career lost a sister ship to the region, without ever learning why. That ship's name had been the Windward Current, and Barrowith still remembered the names of every crew member aboard it, recited quietly to himself once a year, on the anniversary of its disappearance, a private ritual no one else on any of his later postings had ever known about. He had not told Voska this history. It would not have mattered. Voska was ambitious in the particular way that came from being young, talented, and never yet having lost anything that truly mattered to him. Barrowith recognized the type well. because he had once been exactly that kind of officer himself, before the universe had taught him otherwise. The silent needle continued its quiet pursuit through the dark, its stealth systems humming at the edge of their operational limits, engines running just cold enough to avoid easy detection, while still maintaining enough thrust to keep pace with the human ship ahead of them. HFY monitored every fluctuation in their own power output with obsessive care, terrified of the moment a single miscalculation might give them away. She had only been assigned to deep scan duty 8 months earlier, fresh out of the Assembly's Sensor Academy, and this was by far the most dangerous posting of her short career. She had not expected, when she requested a position on a exploratory vessel, that her first major assignment would involve secretly trailing an alien ship into a region of space known for swallowing everything that entered it. She thought, sometimes, of writing to her Kresh family back home, explaining where she was and what she was doing, but she knew the mission was classified, and besides, she did not know how to explain it in a way that would not terrify them. So instead she simply worked, watched her instruments, and tried not to think too hard about the wrecks she already suspected they would soon be flying past. The hours stretched on. Aboard the Meridian, the crew ate a quiet meal together in the small galley, the kind of routine, ordinary moment that made the strangeness of their mission feel almost normal. Osei talked, as he often did, about the fragments of language he had spent his life piecing together, a script left behind by a species so old that no one even had a name for them anymore. He called them, simply, the Architects, because everything they had ever built seemed designed with unbelievable precision and purpose. They didn't build defenses to keep everyone out, Osei explained, gesturing with his fork. That's the part everyone gets wrong when they hear the old stories. They built a test, a gate that only opens for those who understand the key. Everyone who died out here failed the test. They tried to force their way through, or they simply didn't know a test existed at all. And we know the key, Nair said, half a question. I believe we do, Osei said. Comforting, Webb muttered, but he was smiling slightly. He trusted Osei's work as much as the captain did, even if he liked to grumble. Reyes listened to her crew talk, watched them laugh quietly over old jokes, and felt a familiar warmth settle in her chest. This was why she had chosen this crew for this mission, not just for their skills, though those were considerable, but because none of them let fear make their decisions for them. They were careful, they were prepared, but they were not afraid. Later that night, ship time, Reyes stood alone on the observation deck, looking out at the slow, silent approach of the threshold. From here it looked like nothing, just darker patches of dust against the stars, swirling slowly in shapes that almost seemed deliberate, almost seemed like they had been drawn by some enormous, patient hand. Arya, she said quietly. Anything new on that contact? Nothing further, Captain. The anomaly has not repeated in 11 hours. It may have been nothing at all. Keep watching anyway, Reyes said. If someone's following us into this place, I want to know before they find out the hard way what we already know. Understood, Arya said. Captain, may I ask a question? Go ahead. If we do detect a follower, and they are in danger, do you intend to warn them? Reyes was quiet for a long moment, watching the dust clouds drift past the viewport like slow, silent smoke. Yes, she said finally. If it comes to that, we warn them, whoever they are. Understood, Captain, Arya said, and said nothing more. 14 hours after Reyes had first asked for a course confirmation, the Meridian crossed the invisible boundary marked on every star chart in the galaxy by a plain, simple red line. There was no dramatic flash of light, no alarm, no sudden change in the stars outside. The ship simply continued forward, exactly as it had been moving for the past day, into a stretch of space that no living crew had ever entered and returned from. Behind it, hidden in the drifting dust, the silent needle followed. Neither ship knew, yet, exactly what waited for them deeper inside. But one of them had spent 11 years preparing for this moment. The other had made its decision in less than an hour, driven by ambition and curiosity, with nothing but hope and a fast, quiet engine to protect it. The threshold did not care about ambition. It had never cared about hope either. It cared only about one thing, whether or not you understood the key. Aboard the Meridian, Reyes gave the order to reduce non-essential systems to save power for the long journey ahead, and the ship settled into a steady, quiet cruise through the dark. She stood for a long while at the front viewport, watching the strange, slow-moving dust clouds part and swirl around them, and thought about all the ships that had come this way before and never returned. She did not feel afraid, exactly. She felt something closer to responsibility, the weight of 5 lives, plus her own, riding on a decade of another person's careful research and her own decision to trust it completely. Behind her, unseen, the silent needle adjusted its course to match, its crew equally quiet, equally focused, each of them carrying their own private hopes and doubts into the same unknown darkness. 2 ships, 2 crews, 2 very different reasons for being here, and neither one yet fully aware of how closely their fates were about to become tangled together. Ahead of both ships, deep in the dust and the dark, something old began, very slowly, to wake up. Inside the threshold, the stars looked wrong. That was the first thing Priya Nair noticed. 20 hours after the meridian crossed the boundary line, she was running a routine diagnostic on the navigation array when she glanced up at the main view screen and stopped, her hands frozen over the console. "Captain," she said, "take a look at this." Reyes came over and followed her gaze. Outside, the stars were still there, still burning in their usual patterns, but something about the light felt thin, stretched, like sound traveling through water instead of air. Dust drifted across the view in long, slow curls, and here and there, small points of reflected light glinted where sunlight caught on something solid. "Debris," Webb said from his station, already running the sensors. "A lot of it. Old debris." Arya's voice came through the speakers, calm as always. "I am detecting the remains of at least 11 vessels within scanning range, Captain. Hull fragments, drive cores, and what appears to be at least 2 structures large enough to have been colony ships or deep space stations. Ages vary from approximately 300 to over 2,000 years old." Osei leaned forward in his seat, eyes bright with the kind of excitement that only a scholar gets when years of theory finally meet solid evidence. "That matches the old accounts. Every species that lost ships out here reported the same thing. Nothing ever comes back, but nothing ever seems to be destroyed in a normal way either. No explosions, no battle damage, just stopped." "Stopped how?" Reyes asked. "That's what we're here to find out," Osei said. Nair adjusted the sensors, and slowly, an image built on the main screen, the broken shape of an old warship, its hull, a design none of them recognized, drifting silent and dark among the dust. There were no scorch marks, no signs of a hull breach from weapons fire. It looked, if anything, like a ship that had simply run out of power and drifted to a stop, its crew still aboard, its systems perfectly intact but frozen and lifeless. "It's like a museum," Nair said quietly. "A very quiet, very sad museum." Webb zoomed the sensor feed in closer, studying the details of the nearest wreck more carefully. It was long and narrow, built from a dull silver metal that had gone dark with age, its hull marked by strange symbols none of them recognized. There were no visible weapons on its exterior, no signs of armor plating beyond the basic kind every ship carried for meteor protection. It looked, more than anything, like a survey vessel not unlike their own, built for exploration, not for war. "Whoever they weren't looking for a fight," he said. "Same as us. Just trying to understand what was out here. And it stopped them anyway," Reyes said quietly. "That's what worries me," Osei admitted. "If this place only stopped hostile ships, or only stopped ships that attacked it first, that would be one thing. But every wreck we're finding looks peaceful. Unarmed, mostly. Which means whatever test this place runs, it isn't about strength. It's about something else. Something these ships didn't have, and something I'm gambling we do." Reyes felt the weight of that gamble settle more heavily on her shoulders as the ship drifted further into the debris field. She thought about the crew members who must have once served on that silent wreck, going about their duties just as her own crew was now, never knowing that this particular day would be their last. Reyes felt a chill run through her, but she kept her voice steady. "Arya, plot a course around the debris field. I don't want us bumping into anything by accident. Osei, I want you looking at every wreck we pass. If there's a pattern to how these ships died, I want to know about it before we find out the hard way." "Already on it, Captain," Osei said, already pulling up his data slate. Deeper in the dust, At a careful distance, the silent needle drifted through the same debris field, and its crew reacted very differently. By the old stars, Sane whispered, staring at the same wrecks on her own view screen. She was young, barely out of flight training, and this was her first mission beyond safe, mapped space. There's so many of them. Steady, Voska said, though even his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. This is exactly what the old reports described. Whole ships, powered down, no battle damage. Something out here does not destroy, it stops. Barrowith studied the readings on his own console, his old hands moving slowly and carefully. Commander, look at this hull marking here. He pointed to a faint symbol still visible on one of the drifting wrecks, half covered in dust. That is an old Ashkar Empire design, nearly 2,000 years old, and that one there. He pointed to another, smaller wreck nearby. Unless I am very wrong, that hull design belongs to the Grenethi survey fleet. They lost a ship out here almost 400 years ago. It was one of the reasons they closed their borders near this region. Different species, Sane said, different centuries, all stopped the same way. Yes, Barrowith said, which means whatever is doing this has been here, and has been doing this for a very, very long time. And it does not care who you are or where you come from. Shane stared at the drifting Ashkar wreck a moment longer, unable to look away. She had grown up hearing stories about the old Ashkar Empire, tales told to younglings about their great fleets and their eventual quiet decline. No one in those stories had ever mentioned this, an entire warship, lost without explanation, still drifting out here centuries later like a toy, abandoned by some enormous, careless child. Do you think they suffered? She asked quietly, not really expecting an answer. Barrowith considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things. I do not know, he said finally. The lack of distress signals troubles me more than anything else. A crew that suffers usually tries to call for help, even when they know help will not arrive in time. It is instinct. These ships sent nothing. Whatever caught them, I suspect it happened too quickly, for fear to even take hold. That's not comforting, Sane said. No, Barrowith agreed. It is not meant to be. It is meant to be honest. Voska, listening from across the bridge, said nothing, but his earlier bravado had noticeably quieted since they entered the debris field. He found himself, more than once, glancing at the small human ship on his screen, and wondering, with growing unease, what exactly its crew knew that had given them the confidence to fly this deep without hesitation. Voska was quiet for a moment, watching the human ship's small, steady shape moving ahead of them through the debris field, weaving carefully between wrecks, with a precision that suggested either very good luck or very good planning. They're not slowing down, he said finally. Look at their course. They're not even hesitating. Dasarel checked her readings again. Confirmed, sir. The human ship is maintaining a steady heading, adjusting only to avoid physical debris. They are showing no signs of the caution we would expect from a ship entering a graveyard like this. Either they are the most foolish species we have ever encountered, Voska murmured, or they already know something about this place that we do not. No one answered him. They simply kept following. Aboard the Meridian, the crew worked through the debris field for the better part of 2 days, ship time, cataloging wrecks, studying old hull markings, and slowly building a picture of just how many species had lost ships out here over the centuries. Osei barely slept, moving between his cabin and the observation deck, cross-referencing every new piece of data against the fragments of the old architect language he had spent his career learning. I think I understand the shape of it now, he told Reyes, late on the second night, when most of the crew had gone to rest. They sat together in the dim light of the observation deck, mugs of coffee cooling, untouched, between them. Go on, Reyes said. The architects didn't build this place to kill ships, Osei said. I still believe that. I think they built it to protect something. Something at the center of the threshold, something important enough that they didn't just want to hide it. They wanted to test anyone who came looking for it. The wrecks we're seeing aren't casualties of a weapon. I think they're failed applicants. Applicants for what? Osei shrugged, but his eyes were bright. I don't know yet. But every wreck we've cataloged shares one thing in common. None of them transmitted anything unusual before they stopped. No distress call about an attack. No sign of a fight. Whatever caught them so completely and so quickly that they never even had time to be afraid. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. And the key you found, you think it stops that from happening to us? I think it's supposed to tell whatever is out here that we belong, that we're not a threat, and that we understand the rules well enough to be let through. And if you're wrong? Osei met her eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw a flicker of real doubt cross his face. Then we'll be the 12th wreck in this field, Captain. But I don't think I'm wrong. I've spent 11 years on this. I wouldn't have asked you to bring the ship out here if I wasn't sure. Reyes nodded slowly, and reached over to squeeze his shoulder once, briefly. I believe you, Kian. Get some sleep. We're going to need you sharp for whatever's next. Osei did not move to leave right away. He sat quietly for a moment, turning his mug of cold coffee slowly in his hands. Can I ask you something, Captain? Off the record? Go ahead. Why did you say yes to this mission, really? You could have turned down my request. Most captains would have. I've had my research rejected by review boards a dozen times over the years, always with the same reasoning. Too speculative, too dangerous, not worth the risk to a crew. Reyes considered the question for a moment before answering. Honestly? Because I read your file, and somewhere around page 40, I stopped seeing it as speculation, and started seeing it as a puzzle that hadn't been solved yet. Not because it couldn't be, but because no one had been patient enough to try. I've spent my whole career flying survey routes to places other people had already mapped, filling in details no one would ever really need. This was the first mission I'd seen in years that felt like it actually mattered, like it might change something. And if it kills us instead? Then at least we tried to understand something, instead of just avoiding it out of fear, Reyes said. That's always seemed like the better way to live to me, even when it isn't the safer one. Osei smiled faintly at that, some of the tension easing from his shoulders for the first time in days. My mother used to say something similar. She was a field archaeologist too, back on Earth. Old-fashioned dirt and stone kind, not stars and dust. She used to say that anything worth understanding was usually worth being a little afraid of. Sounds like a wise woman. She was, Osei said quietly. She'd have loved this, being out here, this close to actually solving it. He stood, finally, gathering his tablet and his cold coffee. Good night, Captain. Good night, Kian. Far behind them, in the dark, the silent needle continued its careful pursuit. Dasarel had barely slept in 2 days, her nerves stretched thin from constantly monitoring the ship's stealth systems, terrified of the moment the human ship might finally notice them. Barrowith spent his rest hours studying the same wrecks the human crew was studying, though from a greater distance and with much less detailed sensors, muttering old warnings to himself that no one else on the ship seemed to want to hear. Voska, meanwhile, grew more excited with every hour that passed. They're heading for the center, he said, studying the human ship's course projections, straight toward the deepest part of the debris field, where the sensor readings get strangest. That has to be where the source is. Whatever is doing this, whatever is out here, that's where we'll find it. Or where we'll die trying to find it, Barrowith said, not looking up from his console. You've said that a dozen times now, old friend, Voska said, though not unkindly. And yet here you are, still with us. Loyalty is not the same as agreement, Commander, Barrowith replied. I follow you because I swore to. I do not follow you because I think this is wise. Voska said nothing to that. He simply watched the small human ship on his screen, moving steady and sure through a graveyard that had claimed every other ship that had ever entered it, and felt his excitement mixed, more and more, with something that felt uncomfortably close to fear. On the 3rd day inside the threshold, everything changed. It began with a sound, not a sound exactly, since sound cannot travel through the vacuum of space, but a vibration that ran through the hull of the Meridian, felt more than heard, like a low note played on some enormous, distant instrument. Arya registered it first. Captain, I am detecting an energy signature ahead of us, approximately 200,000 kilometers out. It does not match anything in my databases. It is organized, structured. I believe it may be some form of communication, or possibly a scanning process. Reyes was in the command chair in seconds, on screen. The image that appeared showed nothing visible at first, just empty space, dust, and distant stars. But layered over it, Arya displayed a wave pattern, a slow pulse of energy moving outward in a perfect expanding circle. like ripples on the surface of still water. "It's scanning us," Webb said, watching his own console. "That's a sweep pattern. Something out there just pinged the whole debris field, and I think we were caught in it." Osei was already at his station, pulling up every fragment of the old architect language he had ever recorded, cross-referencing the pattern of the energy pulse against symbols and structures he had spent years memorizing. His hands moved fast, faster than Reyes had ever seen him move. "Kian," Reyes said, "talk to me." "Give me a moment," Osei said, not looking up. This is close to a pattern I've seen before, in the fragments from the Kesh wreck. A greeting, or a question. I think it's asking us something." "Asking us what?" "I think," Osei said slowly, "it's asking us to identify ourselves, properly, using the key." Reyes felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice level. "Nair, is the transmission array ready?" "Ready and standing by, Captain," Nair said. "Just say the word." Reyes looked at Osei. "Kian, now or never, are we sending it?" Osei took a slow breath, looked at the pattern on the screen one more time, and nodded. "Send it." Nair's hands moved across her console, and a moment later, a new signal went out from the meridian, broadcast into the dust and the dark ahead of them. A careful, precise pattern of pulses, built from 11 years of painstaking research, aimed at whatever unseen intelligence had just reached out and touched their ship with an invisible wave of energy. For a long, silent moment, nothing happened. Then, far behind the meridian, aboard the Silent Needle, every alarm on the bridge went off at once. "Report!" Voska shouted, gripping the edge of his chair as the ship shuddered under some unseen force. "We've been scanned," Dasarel called out, her voice cracking with fear. "The same energy wave that hit the human ship, it swept right through us too. I don't know if it detected us specifically, or if it caught everything in range, but sir, it definitely touched us." "Did we transmit anything back?" Voska demanded. "No, sir. We're on full stealth protocol. We didn't respond to anything." "Then maybe it doesn't know we're here," Voska said, though his voice had lost all of its earlier confidence. Barrowith looked up from his console, his old face grim. "Commander, the human ship responded to that scan. I detected their transmission clearly. A structured signal sent directly back along the same path the scan came from. We did not respond. We stayed silent." "Is that bad?" Sane asked, her hands white-knuckled on the flight controls. Barrowith did not answer right away. He simply stared at his readings, at the massive, ancient wreck field surrounding them on all sides, filled with the remains of every ship that had ever failed to answer correctly, and felt the old, familiar pressure of an approaching storm settle heavily over his chest. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I believe we are about to find out." Aboard the Meridian, the crew sat in tense silence for a long while after the transmission had gone out, watching their screens for any sign of a response. Reyes found herself counting seconds without meaning to, a habit left over from years of routine ship operations, where every silence had an expected length. This silence had no expected length. No one on her crew, no one in the whole of human space, had ever been in this position before. "Should we send it again?" Nair asked eventually, her hand hovering near the transmission controls. "No," Osei said quietly. "If this really is a test, sending the same answer twice before it's even had time to consider the first one might look like panic, or worse, like we're trying to force a response. I think we wait." So they waited. Webb ran a final check on the ship's minimal defenses, more out of habit than any real belief they would help. Nair returned to her console and busied herself running calculations she didn't strictly need to run, just to keep her hands moving. Reyes stayed in the command chair, watching the silent dust drift past the viewport, and thought about all the captains before her who must have made a similar choice, in a similar moment, and never lived to know if they had chosen correctly. Ahead of both ships, deep within the heart of the threshold, whatever had sent that scanning pulse fell silent again, waiting, patient, ancient, and utterly indifferent to which of the two small ships drifting in the dark had understood its question, and which had not. Nothing happened for 6 full hours after the Meridian sent its response into the dark. Reyes had ordered the crew to stay at their stations, sleeping in shifts, eating quick meals at their consoles rather than in the galley. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to feel, though no one spoke about it directly. They simply worked, watched their screens, and waited. "Anything, Arya?" Reyes asked, for perhaps the 20th time. "No further scans detected, Captain. No response to our transmission. All systems remain nominal." "Maybe it didn't work," Webb muttered, rubbing his eyes. "Or maybe it did," Osei said, from where he sat hunched over his data slate. "And now we're simply being allowed to continue. I told you, Captain. I believe this isn't a weapon. I believe it's a test. And a test doesn't always announce that you've passed. Sometimes it just lets you keep walking." Nair stretched at her console, trying to work the stiffness out of her shoulders after so many hours of sitting still. "You know," she said, half to herself, "back on Earth, we used to have a saying about tests like this. Something about how the wait is always worse than the actual exam." "Did that saying ever make the wait any shorter?" Webb asked, not looking up from his own screen. "Not once," Nair admitted, and a few tired chuckles passed around the bridge, breaking some of the tension that had built up over the long hours of silence. Reyes allowed herself a small smile at the exchange, grateful for the moment of lightness, even as her own nerves stayed tightly wound. She had learned long ago that a crew who could still find small things to laugh about, even in the middle of genuine danger, was a crew that would hold together when it mattered most. She made a mental note to thank Nair for it later, quietly, the way she usually thanked her crew for the things that mattered, but were easy to overlook in the moment. As if summoned by his words, Arya's voice returned, calm, but carrying a note of something new. "Captain, I am detecting movement ahead of us. Small objects, numbering in the hundreds, emerging from the debris field roughly 100,000 kilometers out. They were not visible on previous scans. I believe they may have been dormant until now." "On screen," Reyes said, sitting forward. The image that appeared showed a wide, slow-moving cloud of small shapes, glinting faintly in the starlight, spreading out ahead of the meridian, like a flock of birds taking to the sky. Each object was small, no larger than a shuttlecraft, but there were so many of them that together they formed a vast, shifting wall across the ship's path. "Drones," Webb said, already running a threat analysis. "Automated and old. Look at that power signature. Whatever's driving them has been running for a very long time. But active. Definitely active." "Weapon status?" Reyes asked. "None detected yet," Webb said. "No targeting locks, no weapon charge signatures. But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. It just means I can't tell yet." Osei stood up from his station, moving closer to the main screen, studying the shapes of the drones with the same intense focus he gave to ancient wreckage. "Look at the formation," he said. "It's not random. It's not even really a wall. It's a pattern. Look, there, and there. It's almost like a corridor. A path through the middle." Reyes looked closer, and saw what he meant. The drones were not spread evenly. They curved gently around a clear space at the center, forming a wide, open channel that led directly through the swarm and out the other side. "They're not blocking our way," Osei said. "They're showing us the way. Or herding us somewhere we don't want to go," Webb said. "Only one way to find out," Reyes said. She turned to Nair. "Hold our current heading, straight through the center of that channel. If they wanted us dead, I think they would have done it by now instead of forming a path. Arya, keep broadcasting our identification key continuously as we approach, just in case it needs repeating." "Understood, Captain," Arya said, and the ship began its slow approach toward the shifting wall of ancient drones. The bridge fell into a tense, focused quiet as the meridian closed the distance. Reyes found herself gripping the arms of her command chair tighter than she meant to, and made a conscious effort to relax her hands, aware that a nervous captain made for a nervous crew. She kept her voice level as she spoke. "Everyone stay calm, and stay at your stations. If anything changes, I want to know immediately, no matter how small it seems." "Understood, Captain," came the reply, echoed quietly around the bridge. Nair watched the drones grow larger on her screen, her earlier fascination now mixed with a healthy dose of fear. Up close, the geometric patterns etched into each drone's hull seemed to shift slightly depending on the angle of the light, almost like they were alive in some subtle way she couldn't quite explain with any of her engineering knowledge. She found herself wondering what kind of minds had built something so beautiful and so dangerous at the same time, and whether the architects, whoever they had been, had ever imagined their creation would still be running, still testing new arrivals, thousands of years after they themselves had presumably vanished. Range to the edge of the formation, 1,000 kilometers, Arya reported. 800, 500. Reyes watched the numbers fall, her heart beating a little faster with every update, though her face remained calm and steady for the sake of her crew. This was the moment, she knew, when all of Osei's research would either prove itself correct or prove itself tragically, fatally wrong. 200 kilometers, Arya said, entering the formation now. Behind them, at a distance that felt, to the crew of the Silent Needle, both far too close and far too dangerous, Voska watched the same swarm appear on his own sensors, and felt his excitement curdle into something closer to dread. Sir, the human ship is heading directly into the swarm, Dasarel reported, her voice tight. They're not slowing down. Options, Voska said. We could hold position here, Barowith said. Let them go first. See what happens before we commit ourselves. And if they pass through safely and continue on, and we lose them? Voska said. This entire mission has been about following them to whatever they're searching for. If we stop now, we learn nothing. If we follow them into that, and it turns out to be a weapon, Barowith said, we learn nothing either, Commander, because we will be dead. Voska was silent for a long moment, watching the human ship's small shape drift closer and closer to the edge of the drone swarm. Then he made his decision. We follow, but we hold well back, and the moment anything looks wrong, we break off and retreat. Sane, keep us in their sensor shadow as closely as you safely can. If those drones are only responding to the human ship's transmission, staying close to them may be our only chance of passing through unnoticed. Understood, sir, Sane said, though her hands were shaking slightly on the controls. Aboard the Meridian, the ship slid slowly into the open channel at the heart of the drone swarm, and the crew held their breath collectively, as the small glinting shapes drifted past on either side, close enough now to make out fine details, delicate limbs, strange geometric patterns etched into their hulls, and a soft, pulsing light at the center of each one that seemed almost, impossibly, alive. Webb kept his hand near the point defense controls out of pure instinct, even though every reading on his screen told him the drones were showing no aggressive behavior at all. Old training habits, he thought, were hard to shake, even when the situation clearly called for something other than a soldier's caution. He forced his hand to relax and simply watched, the way the rest of the crew was watching, half in fear and half in something closer to wonder. They're beautiful, Nair whispered, unable to stop herself. They're old, Osei said, just as quietly. Older than anything else we've found out here. Look at the design language. It's more refined than the wrecks in the outer field. I think these are close to the source. I think we're close to whatever the wrecks were trying, and failing, to reach. The Meridian continued forward, and one by one, the drones on either side turned, not toward the ship, not with any hostility, but simply orienting themselves like flowers, turning to follow the sun, watching the small human vessel pass through their midst without a single one of them powering a weapon or breaking formation. Arya, Reyes said quietly. Status. No hostile action detected, Captain. The drones appear to be escorting us rather than obstructing us. I believe. Arya paused, an unusual hesitation for the ship's AI. Captain, I am now detecting a faint secondary contact within the drone formation. Small, moving at a similar relative speed to our own ship, tucked into our sensor wake. Reyes's stomach tightened. The same contact from before. Unable to confirm with certainty, but the profile is consistent, yes. Are the drones reacting to it? Unclear, Captain. The follower vessel appears to be using our own transmission signal as partial cover, remaining close enough that it may be difficult for the drone network to distinguish it as a separate, unidentified object. However, I cannot guarantee this will continue to work as we move deeper. Reyes exchanged a look with Webb, then with Osei. If they're using us as cover, they don't understand what they're flying into. They don't have the key. They're just hoping to slip through in our shadow. That's a very dangerous hope, Osei said quietly. Reyes made her decision quickly. Arya, widen our transmission. I want the identification key broadcasting on every open frequency we have, not just the narrow band the drones are responding to. If there's any chance that ship behind us can pick up a copy of our signal and use it themselves, I want them to have that chance. Captain, Webb said carefully, that ship has been tailing us in secret for days. They haven't announced themselves. We don't know who they are, or why they're really out here. I know, Reyes said. But I'm not going to let anyone die out here without at least trying to give them what we have. If they choose not to use it, that's on them. But it's not going to be on us for not offering. Nair had already begun adjusting the transmission array, widening the broadcast as ordered. Signal going out on all open frequencies now, Captain. If they've got working sensors, they'll hear it. Aboard the Silent Needle, Dasarel's console lit up with a sudden flood of new data. Sir, the human ship just widened its transmission. I'm picking up the full pattern of whatever key they've been sending. It's flooding every frequency we monitor. Voska leaned over her shoulder, staring at the readout. Why would they do that? Are they trying to draw us out? I don't think so, sir, Barrowith said slowly, studying the same data on his own console. Look at the pattern. It's not a challenge. It's not a trap signal. If I'm reading this correctly, I believe they are trying to share it with us. Dasarel looked between her two superiors, unsure whose side to take, though privately she found herself leaning toward Barrowith's reading of the situation. She had watched the human ship's behavior closely for days now, and nothing about it matched the profile of a species trying to set a trap. Traps required patience of a certain calculating kind, a willingness to wait and watch for a target to make a mistake. The human ship had done the opposite, broadcasting openly, moving confidently, behaving in every way like a crew that had nothing to hide and no interest in hiding it. Sir, she said carefully, for what it's worth, their transmission pattern doesn't match anything in our threat databases. It doesn't look like a lure. It looks almost identical to a standard distress beacon format, just built around a much more complex signal. The bridge went very quiet. That doesn't make sense, Voska said. Why would they help a ship they don't even know is here? A ship that has been secretly following them for days. What could they possibly gain from that? Barrowith looked up at his commander, his old eyes tired but very steady. Perhaps nothing, Commander. Perhaps they simply did not want to see another ship die out here. Even one they have never spoken to. Even one that has been hiding from them this entire time. I have served the Assembly for 60 years, and I have never once seen any of our own ships do such a thing for a stranger. Voska stared at the data for a long moment, torn between suspicion and something he could not quite name. It could still be a trick, he said finally. A trap to expose us, to force us to transmit and give away our position. It could be, Barrowith agreed. Or it could be exactly what it looks like. We will not know unless we test it. And if it's false, and we transmit, we announce ourselves to whatever built this place, and to the human ship as well, Voska said. Yes, Barrowith said simply. That is the risk. Voska looked out at the vast field of ancient, watching drones surrounding their ship on every side, at the human vessel drifting steadily ahead of them through the open channel, and felt the weight of a decision he did not want to make, pressing down on him. Hold position, he said finally. Do not transmit. We continue to follow in their wake, using their signal as passive cover only. We do not reveal ourselves. Not yet. Barrowith's antennae drooped slightly. The closest to Korvath came to a sigh. As you order, Commander. Dasarel said nothing further, but she kept the human signal recorded and saved on a private partition of her own console, unwilling, for reasons she did not fully examine, to let the commander's order erase what she had captured. Some quiet instinct told her that they might need it again before this mission was over, whether Voska wanted to admit that possibility or not. Aboard the Meridian, the crew allowed themselves a rare moment of relief as the last of the drones drifted past on either side, the open channel closing gently behind them without incident. Reyes ordered a brief stand-down from full alert status, letting the crew rotate through a proper meal and a few hours of real rest for the first time in nearly 2 days. One test down, Webb said, stretching as he stood from his station, assuming that's what it actually was. There will be more, Osei said, still studying his notes, even as the others relaxed around him. I don't think this was the final one. The fragments I've translated suggest a layered structure, each stage more demanding than the last. We should be grateful the first was survivable. I don't think we can assume the rest will be as gentle. Reyes nodded slowly, filing that warning away, as she headed toward the galley for her own long-overdue meal. Behind her, the ship continued its steady course, deeper into the threshold, carrying its small, tired crew, ever closer to whatever waited at the very center of the ancient Guardian's domain. Ahead of them, unaware that its gift had been offered, and quietly refused, the Meridian continued forward through the parting drones, closer and closer to the heart of the threshold, where something ancient and patient continued to wait, watching every ship that passed through its test, with an attention that had not wavered in over 2,000 years. The drone swarm closed slowly behind the Meridian as it passed through, folding back into its resting pattern, like water settling after a stone has sunk through it. Reyes watched it happen on the rear sensors, and felt a small knot of worry tighten in her chest. Arya. Status on our follower. Still present, Captain. The unidentified vessel passed through the drone corridor immediately behind us, remaining within our sensor wake the entire time. It appears the drones did not distinguish it as a separate threat, likely because it stayed close enough to register as part of our own engine wash. They didn't take the key, Osei said quietly, watching the same data. We opened the channel for them, and they didn't take it. Maybe they couldn't read it in time, Nair offered. Maybe their systems aren't compatible with our transmission format. Maybe, Reyes said, though she didn't fully believe it. Or maybe they're being careful. Whoever they are, if they've been hiding from us this entire time, they're not going to suddenly trust a stranger's signal without a reason to. They should still take it, Webb said grimly. Whatever their reasons for hiding, none of that will matter if the next test doesn't let them slide through in our shadow the way this one did. Reyes turned to Osei. Kian, what's ahead of us? What's the next stage? Osei pulled up his notes, his brow furrowed in concentration. Based on the pattern of the wrecks in the outer field, and the way this test has escalated so far, first a scan, then a physical gate, I'd expect the next stage to be more active, more direct. The wrecks closest to the center of the threshold showed the most damage relative to their age, which tells me the deeper you go, the less patient whatever built this place becomes with mistakes. So it gets harder, Reyes said. I believe so, yes. Reyes was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she turned to Nair. Keep the wide broadcast running continuously. Every frequency. All the time. Until we're through. If they're not taking it, because they can't tell it apart from background noise, I want to make it impossible to miss. Already running, Captain, Nair said. While they waited, the crew used the quiet hours to prepare as best they could for whatever came next. Webb ran through every emergency protocol in the ship's database one more time, even the ones he knew by heart, simply to keep his mind occupied and his hands busy. Nair rebuilt the transmission array's power routing twice, searching for any small improvement that might make the broadcast even slightly stronger or clearer. Osei barely left his station at all, reviewing every fragment of the architect language he had ever recorded, searching for anything he might have missed that could help them understand what waited ahead. Reyes spent part of the time walking the ship, checking in with each member of her crew individually, the way she always did before she expected things to get difficult. She found Nair in engineering, elbow deep in a coupling panel that didn't strictly need adjusting. How are you holding up? Reyes asked. Better if my hands have something to do, Nair admitted, not looking up from her work. You? About the same, Reyes said honestly. Kian thinks whatever's ahead is going to be harder than the drones. I trust his instincts on this by now. Do you ever wish you'd said no to this mission? Nair asked, finally glancing up. Reyes considered the question seriously before answering. No, she said. Scared, yes. Plenty of times. But not sorry. Whatever happens from here, we've already learned things about this place that no one else in the history of every species that's ever charted this region has learned. That matters, even if it's frightening. Nair nodded slowly, seeming to draw some comfort from the answer, and returned to her work with a little more ease in her shoulders. 12 hours later, deep in the heart of the threshold, the ship encountered something new. It began as a shift in the dust ahead of them, a slow, deliberate parting of the drifting particles, revealing a structure that had been hidden within the debris for who knew how long. It was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, built from a dark, smooth material that seemed to drink in the light from the distant stars rather than reflect it. Its surface was covered in the same geometric patterns Osei had seen on the smaller drones, but vast now, sprawling across kilometers of hull, like the architecture of some impossible cathedral. That's it, Osei breathed, staring at the screen with wide eyes. That's the source. That has to be the source. Arya, full scan, Reyes ordered. Scanning, Captain. The structure is not registering as a natural formation. It is artificial, and it is active. I am detecting energy signatures throughout its surface, consistent with the scanning pulse we encountered earlier, but far more powerful. Life signs? Webb asked. None detected. I do not believe this structure is inhabited in any conventional sense. It may be the architect's original creation, or it may be something they built and then left behind to operate on its own. A guardian, Osei said quietly, exactly like the old fragments described. A guardian that doesn't need anyone to run it, because it was built to run itself, forever, testing everyone who comes looking for whatever it's protecting. Reyes stared at the massive structure ahead of them, feeling the same mixture of awe and unease that she guessed her whole crew was feeling. Aria, transmit the full key sequence. All of it, exactly as Dr. Osei prepared it. Transmitting now, Captain. The signal went out, a long, careful pattern built from over a decade of painstaking research, aimed directly at the heart of the ancient structure ahead of them. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a section of the vast surface began to glow, a soft golden light spreading outward from a single point, like ripples on water, tracing the geometric patterns across the entire structure, until the whole thing shimmered faintly against the darkness of space. It's responding, Osei whispered. Aria, talk to me, Reyes said. The structure is generating a return signal, Captain. Complex, far more detailed than anything we've received so far. I am attempting to translate, but this will take time. Dr. Osei's database does not have direct matches for much of this pattern. Osei was already at his station, pulling every resource he had, cross-referencing the incoming signal against every fragment of the architect language he had ever recorded. It's some kind of greeting, he said slowly, working through the pattern piece by piece. No, more than that. I think it's confirmation. I think we passed. I think it's telling us we're recognized. Osei kept working, piecing together more of the response as it continued to arrive in slow, careful waves. There's more, he said. I think it's explaining something about itself, a purpose. The word patterns keep circling back to a concept I've only seen once before, in a badly damaged fragment from the Kesh wreck, something close to keeper or steward, though neither translation feels quite complete. I don't think this structure was ever meant to be a weapon at all, not first and foremost. I think it was built to guard something, and testing visitors was simply the method the architects chose to decide who was allowed close enough to learn what that something is. Any indication of what it's guarding? Reyes asked. Not yet, Osei said. But I don't think we're meant to find out all at once. I think that's likely a conversation that continues, the deeper in we're trusted to go. Relief spread visibly across the bridge, the crew exchanging looks of quiet disbelief and hope. Reyes allowed herself a small, careful smile. Then we did it, she said. We're through. Captain, Aria said, her voice cutting through the moment with sudden urgency. I must report a change in status regarding the unidentified follower vessel. Reyes's smile faded instantly. Report. The follower vessel has remained in our sensor wake throughout our approach to the central structure. However, as we came to a stop to receive the return transmission, the follower vessel continued moving briefly before correcting itself. I believe this caused a momentary separation from our engine wash, exposing its own drive signature independently for approximately 4 seconds. Did the structure detect it? Reyes asked, her pulse quickening. Unknown, Captain, but the golden light pattern across the structure's surface has begun to shift. I believe a second, separate scan may be initiating, targeted at a location behind us, rather than at our own position. On the rear sensors, a new light began to spread, thinner, sharper, and colored a deep, warning red, instead of the warm gold that had greeted the meridian. Aboard the Silent Needle, alarms blared across the bridge, as the ship shuddered under the force of the new scan. We've been made, Dasarel screamed over the noise. Direct contact, sir. It's got us. It's got us clean. Evasive maneuvers. Voska shouted. Sane, get us out of here. Now. Sane's hands flew across the controls, throwing the small stealth ship into a hard turn, engines flaring bright, as she fought to break away from the massive structure looming ahead of them. But even as the ship spun and accelerated, the red light on the structure's surface continued to spread, faster now, tracing patterns that pulsed and shifted with a speed that made the earlier golden welcome look slow and gentle by comparison. Barrowith, Options, Voska demanded. The old engineer was working frantically at his console, sweat beading on his gray skin despite the ship's climate controls. There's nothing conventional I can offer you, Commander. This is not a weapon system I recognize. It's not locking on with any targeting method in our databases. Then what is happening to my ship? Voska shouted. Sane fought the controls with everything she had, throwing the ship into a series of sharp, desperate turns, trying anything that might break whatever invisible grip was tightening around them. Each attempt seemed to slow their hull further, the ship's frame groaning under stresses the engines were never designed to withstand. Warning lights flared across every console on the bridge, a chaos of red and amber that made it nearly impossible to focus on any single readout. Hull integrity holding, for now, Barrowith called out over the noise, but power draw from the engines is climbing fast, and we are getting nothing back for it. Whatever this is, it isn't damaging us directly. It's simply refusing to let us leave. Dasarel's hands flew across her console, trying every sensor configuration she knew, in a desperate attempt to understand the nature of the field surrounding them. I can't get a clear reading on it, sir. It doesn't match any energy signature in our databases. Not gravity, not electromagnetic, not anything I recognize. Voska closed his eyes for one brief moment, forcing himself to think clearly, despite the mounting panic on his bridge. This was, he realized with a sick, sinking feeling, very likely the exact fate that had claimed every other ship drifting silent in the debris field behind them. Not destroyed by violence, but simply held, patiently and completely, until whatever process came next had run its course. Aboard the Meridian, Reyes watched the scene unfolding on her rear sensors, with growing horror. Arya, can we do anything? Can we transmit something? Warn them off. Tell that structure to stand down. I am attempting to broadcast a modified version of our key toward the follower vessel's position, Captain, in the hope that it may be recognized as a form of vouching. Arya said, already working. But I must be honest, I have no data suggesting this will work. The structure's response pattern to unidentified, evasive contacts appears to be fundamentally different from its response to ships that approach openly. Do it anyway, Reyes said. Do everything you can. Osei stood frozen at his station, watching the growing red light spread across the massive structure, with a look of dawning horror on his face. It's not attacking, he said quietly. Look at the pattern. It's not aggressive, not exactly. It's containing. I think it's trying to hold them in place, not destroy them, contain them. Is that better or worse? Webb asked grimly. I don't know, Osei admitted. I never found a fragment describing what happens after containment. Every wreck we passed on the way in was already still, already stopped. I don't know if that's what's about to happen to that ship, or if it's something else entirely. On the Silent Needle, the crew fought a losing battle against forces they didn't understand. The ship bucked and shuddered as invisible pressure closed around it from every direction, engines screaming, as Sane pushed them to their absolute limit, and still felt the ship slowing, inch by inch, against her will. I can't break free, she cried out. Something's got us. It's not letting go. I've given everything the engines have, and we're still slowing down. Voska gripped his chair, staring at the spreading red light now wrapping fully around his ship's hull on the outer sensors, feeling for the first time in his long, ambitious career, something close to true terror. Barrowith, he said, his voice quiet now, all bravado gone. Was I wrong? Should we have taken the human ship's signal when it was offered? The old engineer looked up at his commander, his expression not angry, not cruel, only sad. I believe we should have, Commander. I believe we still have a few moments left to try. Do it, Voska said. Transmit everything we recorded of their signal. Right now. All of it. On every frequency we have. Beg if you have to. I don't care anymore how it looks. Barrowith's hands moved fast despite his age, pulling up the recorded fragments of the human ship's wide broadcast, everything the Silent Needle's own sensors had picked up over the past several hours of following in the Meridian's shadow. It was incomplete, he knew. They had never fully captured the entire key, only pieces of it, caught passively as the signal washed over their hull again and again. Transmitting now, he said, and sent every fragment they had out into the dark, toward the vast, ancient structure, now wrapped almost entirely in spreading red light around their small, struggling ship. Aboard the Meridian, Arya's voice cut through the tense silence on the bridge. "Captain, I am detecting a transmission from the follower vessel. It appears to be an incomplete partial version of our own key, broadcast back toward the central structure." "They're trying," Reyes said, a strange mixture of relief and dread washing through her. "They finally took it. Arya, can you help? Can you strengthen the signal, fill in the gaps somehow?" "I am attempting to do so now, Captain, cross-referencing their partial transmission against our own complete key, and rebroadcasting a corrected version toward the structure." On the main screen, the two signals, one small and desperate, sent from a ship fighting for its life, and one calm and steady, sent from a ship trying to save a stranger it had never even spoken to, wove together and reached out into the vast ancient darkness, toward a guardian that had been testing every ship that entered its domain for over 2,000 years, waiting to see, one final time, whether it would be enough. Reyes watched the red light continue to spread around the small, struggling alien ship, her hands clenched tight at her console, feeling for the first time since the mission began, truly powerless to help. All the preparation in the world, all of Osei's years of research, and now the only thing left to do was wait and hope that a hastily patched-together signal, built from fragments and desperation, would somehow be enough to convince an ancient, unfeeling guardian to show mercy to a ship it had already judged and begun to punish. "Come on," she whispered again, watching the numbers on her screen, willing them to change. Beside her, Osei stood just as tense, his research spread across his console, every fragment of knowledge he had spent a decade gathering, now riding on a single, uncertain outcome, playing out in the dark ahead of them. For a long, terrible moment, nothing on the Meridian's screens changed. The red light continued to wrap around the small, struggling shape of the silent needle, and the combined signal, part human key, part desperate Korvath fragment, raced out across the darkness, toward the ancient structure, without any sign of being received. "Come on," Reyes whispered, watching the screen, her hands gripping the edge of her console. "Come on, come on." Osei stood frozen beside her, his eyes fixed on the pattern of light spreading across the massive structure, trying to read meaning into every shift and flicker. "It's still building," he said quietly. "The containment field, it's still tightening around them. I don't know if the signal reached in time. I don't know if it's enough." On the silent needle, the crew held on as their small ship groaned under the pressure of forces none of them understood. Sane had stopped fighting the controls, not because she had given up, but because there was simply nothing left to fight with. The engines were at maximum output, and the ship was still slowing, inch by inch, caught in something ancient and patient and utterly indifferent to their fear. "Barrowith," Voska said, quiet now, watching the red light close in around the front viewport. "I want you to know, whatever happens here, you were right, about all of it. I should have listened sooner." The old engineer managed a tired, thin smile. "You listened when it counted, Commander. That is more than many would have done." Dasarel had stopped screaming, gone quiet and still at her station, watching the numbers on her console climb toward a containment percentage that seemed, with every passing second, closer and closer to complete. She thought, in that strange, suspended moment, of her Kresh family back home, of the letter she had never quite found the words to write them, and felt a deep, aching regret that she might never get the chance to write it now. Sane kept her hands on the controls even though there was nothing left for them to do, some stubborn part of her, unwilling to simply let go and wait for whatever came next. She had trained for years to become a pilot, had dreamed since childhood of flying starships to places no one had charted before, and it seemed a cruel joke that her first real taste of the deep unknown might also be her last. And then, without warning, the red light stopped. It did not fade slowly. It simply stopped, all at once, the pattern across the massive structure's surface freezing in place for a long, suspended moment, before beginning, very slowly, to shift, not toward the deep, warning red of before, but toward a paler, softer color, somewhere between amber and gold. "Report." Voska called out, his voice cracking with disbelief. The pressure is easing, sir," Sane said, staring at her controls in shock. "We're not slowing anymore. I think we're free." Aboard the Meridian, the bridge erupted into quiet, disbelieving relief. Arya, confirm, Reyes said, hardly daring to hope. Confirmed, Captain. The containment field around the follower vessel has released. The structure's scan pattern is shifting to a recognition signature similar to the one it used with us. I believe the combined signal was received and accepted just before full containment was achieved. Osei let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding, sagging slightly against his console. They made it, he said. They actually made it. Reyes allowed herself a small, tired smile, watching the small shape of the alien ship on her rear sensors slowly stabilize, its frantic evasive maneuvers easing into something calmer, safer. Get me a channel to that ship, she said. Open frequency. All languages we have translation protocols for. Let's finally introduce ourselves properly. It took a moment for Arya to establish the connection, translating between human speech and the clicking, layered tones of the Korvath language. When the channel finally opened, there was a long pause of static and silence before a voice, hesitant and clearly shaken, came through the speakers. This is Commander Voska Thren, of the Korvath vessel Silent Needle, the voice said, translated smoothly by Arya into clear, simple words. We owe you a debt we cannot easily repay. Reyes leaned forward. Captain Elena Reyes, ISV Meridian. You don't owe us anything, Commander. We're just glad you made it through. There was another pause, longer this time. You knew we were following you, Voska said finally. From the beginning, perhaps. We suspected, Reyes said honestly. We weren't certain until the drone field. But once we knew, we weren't going to let you die out here without at least offering you what we had. Whatever your reasons for following us, that didn't seem like something worth dying over. On the Silent Needle, Voska sat back in his chair, staring at the small human ship on his own view screen, feeling something shift inside him that he did not yet have words for. He had come out here chasing glory, chasing secrets, ready to watch a stranger's ship fail for the sake of what the assembly might learn from its destruction. Instead, that same stranger had reached out, unasked, and pulled his ship back from the edge of a fate that had claimed every other vessel to enter this place for over 2,000 years. Why? He asked simply. We gave you no reason to trust us. We hid from you. We intended, if you succeeded, to use whatever we learned for our own purposes, without ever telling you we were here. There was a pause on the other end, and then Reyes's voice came through again, calm and steady. Because letting you die when we had the means to help wouldn't have made us any safer, Commander. It would have just made us the kind of people who let others die when it was inconvenient to care. We're not interested in being that. Not out here. Not anywhere. Barrowith, listening from his station, closed his eyes briefly, a strange, complicated feeling settling in his old chest, something between relief and shame, and a grudging, growing respect. He thought of the windward current, of the crew whose names he still recited every year, and felt, for the first time in 6 decades, a small measure of peace settle over that old grief. Their loss had not been for nothing after all, he told himself. It had helped shape a caution that, passed down and argued over and nearly ignored, had ultimately kept one more crew alive to tell their story. Sane, still shaking slightly from the ordeal, found herself laughing quietly, a release of tension she hadn't expected. We're alive, she said, mostly to herself. We're actually alive. We are, Voska said, and for the first time since the mission began, his voice carried no trace of ambition or calculation, only simple, honest relief. Thanks to a ship we spent 4 days hiding from. Perhaps that says something about the way we chose to approach this mission in the first place, Commander, Barrowith said gently, no longer bothering to soften his old disagreements with careful diplomacy. Voska managed a tired, rueful smile. Perhaps it does, old friend. I suspect I will be thinking about that lesson for a very long time. The two ships drifted together in the shadow of the vast, ancient structure for a long while after that, neither crew quite ready yet to move on. Osei, unable to resist the opportunity, asked, through Reyes, through Arya's translation, whether the Korvath vessel would be willing to share its own sensor logs of the encounter, in exchange for full access to the human research on the architect language and the key that had gotten both ships through alive. Voska agreed without hesitation. It was, he said quietly, the very least his ship could offer in return. Osei spent the following hours in quiet, careful conversation with the Silent Needle's own small science team, comparing notes across the open channel with the kind of enthusiasm he usually reserved for his oldest research partners back home. It struck him, as he worked, how quickly the earlier fear and secrecy between the two crews had given way to something closer to easy collaboration, now that the reason for hiding had disappeared entirely. "Your sensor logs of the containment field are remarkable," he told Dasarel over the channel. "We only caught the edges of that pattern from our own position. This will help fill in gaps in the architect language I've been stuck on for years." "I am glad something good came of it," Dasarel replied, still sounding faintly shaken from the ordeal, but clearly pleased at the exchange. "It is strange. A few hours ago, I believed we were about to die out here for nothing. Now, you are telling me our data may actually matter." "It matters a great deal," Osei said warmly. "Thank you for sharing it." In the hours that followed, as both ships slowly began preparations to leave the threshold together, following the same safe path that Osei's key had opened, Barrowith found himself standing beside Dasarel at the sensor station, watching the strange, patient structure recede behind them on the rear screen. "We are going to tell them," Barrowith said quietly. "The assembly. We are going to tell them what happened here." "Will they believe us?" Dasarel asked. "I don't know," Barrowith admitted. "I don't know if they'll believe that a species barely a few decades old, one we still barely understand, solved a puzzle that has confounded every other species in known space for over 2,000 years. And I don't know if they'll believe that same species then risked exposing itself to reach back and save the very ship that had been secretly hunting it. But it's true," Dasarel said. "Yes," Barrowith said. "It's true. And I think, whether they believe it easily or not, it is a story the assembly needs to hear." 3 days later, the ISV Meridian and the Silent Needle crossed back over the boundary line, marked on every star chart in known space, emerging together from the threshold into open, ordinary starlight. It was the first time in recorded history that any two ships had entered that stretch of space and both come out again. Word of it spread slowly at first, through quiet channels and cautious reports, the way most important things travel between careful species who have learned not to believe every rumor that reaches their ears. But it spread. Within a few months, the story had reached every major species in the region, not as a legend of destruction and mystery, as the old warnings about the threshold had always been, but as something new. A story about a small, curious species that had solved an ancient puzzle through patience and study, and then, when given the choice to let a secret rival perish for their own advantage, had chosen instead to reach out and help. Among the Korvath assembly, and soon among many other species besides, a new saying began to quietly circulate, half warning and half something closer to respect. "If you ever find yourself following a human ship into deep space, be very careful. Not because you are likely to die out there, but because you may find yourself owing them your life, and discovering, to your own surprise, that they never expected anything in return." Back aboard the Meridian, months later, safely returned to human space, and already deep into the long process of writing up their findings, Reyes found Osei on the observation deck one quiet evening, looking out at familiar, ordinary stars. "You were right, you know," she said, coming to stand beside him. "About all of it. The key, the test, even the part where you thought it wasn't really meant to be a weapon." Osei smiled, tired, but genuinely pleased. "I had 11 years to be right about it, Captain. I would have been embarrassed if I wasn't." Reyes laughed quietly, and for a while they simply stood together, watching the stars, thinking about a strange, ancient structure, light years behind them, still patiently waiting in the dark for the next ship brave or foolish enough to come looking for its secrets, and about a small alien vessel, once hidden and afraid, now flying openly beside them, all the way home. "Do you think we'll go back?" Osei asked eventually. Reyes considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I think," she said slowly, "that some doors are worth knocking on twice, but next time, we bring friends." "Voska's people, you mean?" "Maybe them, maybe others, once word gets around properly. I have a feeling this isn't the last curious ship that's going to come asking questions about the threshold, now that everyone knows it's possible to go in and come back out again. Your research just changed the shape of that whole region of space, Kian. People are going to be studying what you found for a very long time. Osei looked almost embarrassed at the thought, ducking his head slightly. I just wanted to read the words, he said. I didn't expect it to turn into anything more than that. Most important things start that way, Reyes said, someone just wanting to understand something a little better. They stood together a while longer, comfortable in the quiet, watching the familiar stars of home space drift steadily past the viewport. Somewhere behind them, in the direction of the Korvath Assembly's territory, Barrowith was likely already deep into writing his own report, choosing his words as carefully as he had chosen them his whole long career, hoping the assembly would listen this time to what patience and honesty had taught him. Somewhere ahead of them, human scientists and archivists were waiting eagerly to receive Osei's data, ready to spend years, perhaps decades, unpacking everything the mission had learned. Osei smiled again, and out among the endless stars, the story of the human ship that had gone into deep space, and the alien ship that had followed it, and somehow, against every expectation, both come home again, continued quietly on its way, from one curious species to the next.